cell anemia disease, because questions are often asked on the different diseases, right, which are common in India or let's say across the globe. The fourth article is taken from Hindu, page number 1. Now here the Telangana government has moved the Supreme Court against the river interlinking projects of Andhra Pradesh. So in this article, we'll discuss the Interstate River Dispute Act of 1956 and the River Boats Act of 1956, right? So these are the four topics. Let us start with the first topic. The title is A Case for Global Southeast in Securing Ukraine Peace. Now in this article, we shall understand the peacekeeping framework and also the potential for global south. What do you mean by global south and what is the potential for global south? And you can map this topic under GS paper 2. Under the international relations, we have the bilateral, regional and global agreements involving India or India's interests. And why do we study this topic? Because questions of this or questions on this topic can be asked in the UPSC examination as it was asked in the year 2017. Question is, the growing significance of India in the global arena has been accompanied by the need for a balanced approach in its foreign policy, critically analyze. Right? So, in order to answer such type of questions, you need to have a brief or a decent understanding of the geopolitics or the issues confronting different regions or the world. Let us start with the context. Now students, we all know that there is a growing tussle between the Russians and the Western nations, right? Now, given this confrontation tussle, the author of the article tries to suggest that the peacekeeping initiative to bring peace between the two regions should be neutral and credible. The initiatives to be taken to establish peace should be neutral and credible. Now, somewhere the author of the article tries to suggest that if the peace initiatives is initiated by the Western nations, then Russians are unwilling to accept it. Now, let us try to understand. Let me give a background to understand this topic. So, I hope you know the reason behind the Russia-Ukraine war. If you do not know, don't worry. I'll just in brief help you the reason behind the Russia-Ukraine war. So, Russia-Ukraine war, or you can also say Russia and the Western nations confrontation or war. Why? Because this country, Ukraine, is supported by the Western nations. Now, Ukraine, all the ammunition Ukraine is using in a war against Russia, the Western nations are providing Ukraine with all the necessary ammunition. So it's a sort of a war between Russia and the Western powers. The reason the war broke between these two countries is because Russians do not want the Western nations to come close to Russia's border. So this is Russia, right? You see, this is Russia, and Russia does not want the expansion of NATO along the Russia-Ukraine border. What does it mean? NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's an organization of mostly the Western nations, right? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The purpose of NATO is based on collective security, which means attack on any one nation of NATO will result or will mean that there's an attack on all the nations. So in order for security, the countries tend to be a part of NATO. Why? Because NATO is led by which countries? Powerful nations like US, right? We have US, then we have France, Germany. So let's say, for example, India becomes a part of NATO, right? Let's say India will never become a part of NATO, but let's say India becomes a part of NATO, and if China attacks India, which also means that China is attacking each and every country in NATO. In response, all the NATO countries will come together to attack China. Ukraine was willing to be a part of NATO. The NATO countries refused Ukraine to be a part of NATO. Why? Because if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, there will be growing chaos, or there will be chaos in the world. Why? Because Russians would not like this fact that NATO, they are coming close to the Russian borders. This will lead to security tensions along the bordering regions, which would escalate into war. This is what happened with Russia and Ukraine. This is what happened with Russia and Ukraine. So please remember, Russians do not want the Western powers, the Western ammunitions, military to come close to the Russian borders. So all the countries bordering Russia, Russians demand that the Western nations should not support these nations with any military equipments, because supporting these nations with military equipments, which means giving rise to military confrontation. This is what happened, and that led to a war between Russia and Ukraine. And given that these two nations are fighting a war for a long time now, it is important to establish peace. But who will lead the peace initiative? The Russians will not accept the peace initiative coming from the Western nations, because that will obviously be biased. That's the reason the global south, now global south comprises countries from Asia, Africa and Latin America. These nations have a chance, right, to come together to establish peace in the region. To establish peace in the region, and given the neutrality, given the experience of the countries of global south who so far have been neutral, there's a higher chance of bringing in peace between Russia and Ukraine if the global south lead any peace initiatives to establish peace between Russia and Ukraine. This is the context. I hope you understood the context. If not, please let me know in the comment section. I do not see any comments from your side. So any doubt, any confusion, any questions, please let me know. Let me know in the comment section. Right now, understanding the global south, first we'll understand in the context. We understood that it is important for the global south to come together to establish peace in the region. But what is global south? Now when it comes to definition, right, global south refers to countries from Asia, Africa and Latin America. Now these nations from these continents they are referred to as developing nations. Developing nations or underdeveloped nations. Developing nations or underdeveloped nations. Which means these countries are characterized by poverty, inequality, underdevelopment compared to the Western nations. This is what we understand by the term global south. Contrast with global north. Now global north, which means global north is referred to the politically stable and economically advanced countries like US, Japan, France, Germany, South Korea. These countries are referred to as global north. So there is a stark contrast between global north and global south. Now India is a part of global south. India is a part of global south. Economic disparity. If I talk about the economic disparity, right, the global north, they comprise 90% of the world's GDP. They comprise 90% of the world's GDP, which means they are rich nations. They are rich nations, right? Which essentially means that they dominate global trade, global finance. Now talking about economic disparity, right? The global north, they comprise 90% of the GDP, but if we discuss about the global south, they are they're suffering from high debt. The debt is high. Then at the same time, there is a limited industrial limited industrial capacity, which means the industries in the global south are not developed as compared to the developed countries. Then at the same time, the global south, they depend on the external aid, help for their growth and development. If I talk about the technological gap, the global north, they dominate technology in the fields of, let's say, artificial intelligence, space exploration, then digital innovation. And the global south, they actually import technology from the developed countries. This is what we do. We import technology from the global north, the developed countries, right? Then trade imbalance. Now the global south, they export raw materials to the developed countries and they import the finished goods, the value added goods, right? For any country to develop, we have to manufacture. So manufacturing has to be very, very strong. So you manufacture, you develop a, let's say, a product, and then you export. So the global south, they only export raw materials and they import the finished goods, whose value is higher compared to the raw materials. Climate change. Now if you see the global south, they have only contributed 25% to the CO2 emissions. Overall CO2 emissions, the global south have only contributed 25%, but they are the worst sufferers of climate change. Be it the increase in sea level, or let's say increasing climate change, we have extreme weather events. For example, we have floods, then extreme heat. So they have contributed less to the overall CO2 emissions, but they are suffering the most. And the developed countries are not helping the developing countries. The global north is not helping the developing countries to make a switch to renewable energy, because to make a switch to renewable energy, you need technology. So the global north, right, they're hesitant to transfer the technology to the global south so as to adapt to climate change, to respond to the effects of climate change. So I hope you understood what is global north and global south of this picture. So this picture, the blue one indicates global north and the pink one indicates global south. Developed countries versus developing or underdeveloped nations. So India, if you see, it falls, is a part of global south. Now, limitations of a Western-led peacekeeping framework. We discussed the fact that in the context we discussed, Russians are not okay with a peace initiative being led by Russia. See, geographic proximity. The European nations are close to the Russian borders. So ideally, they should be the one who should be leading the peace initiative. But if the Europeans lead the peace initiative, there will be a bias, which means it won't be neutral. There are concerns about neutrality and strategic bias. Now, perceived NATO influence. Russia opposes. So, if any initiative is being led by NATO, Russia says that we are not going to accept any peace initiative led by NATO. Why? Because what Russians feel is that the Europeans or the Western nations, through any initiatives, would actually try to expand the Western influence close to the Russian borders. And this actually threatens the security of Russia. So Russians are not happy with any initiative being led by the Western nations because they feel that it will be biased, it will be devoid of neutrality. Now, in order to provide security to the Eastern European nations, they border Russia. The British had proposed to deploy troops along the Russian borders. And this actually was met with a backlash. The Russians said that this initiative or this proposal to send the troops to maintain peace in the region, to send the troops along the Russia and the Eastern European borders, this will be provocative. This will lead to larger conflict, right? And this is not an initiative that we can think of. Why? Because such an initiative lacks legitimacy. Such an initiative, it lacks legitimacy, right? Next, Trojan horse perception. Now, what is Trojan horse? See, now Trojan horse, which means things are presented in such a way which seems to be useful or which seems to be harmless, but the but the real intention is hidden. Let me give you a story. Let me help you with the origin of this Trojan horse concept. Now, in the ancient times, there were cities like Greece and Troy. The Greece, people of Greece are referred to as Greeks. So the Greeks were planning to attack Troy. Now people in Troy are referred to as Trojans. Trojans. So the Greeks planned to attack the Trojans. It was difficult to attack the Trojans. So what they did is, who? The Greeks. They sent a wooden horse to Troy. So it was a wooden horse. They sent it to Troy. Now the Trojans felt that there is something big coming in our city, so they welcomed the wooden horse. And when they opened the wooden horse, what they saw was the soldiers of the city Greece. And the soldiers entered the gates, opened the gates, and this is how the Greeks attacked the Trojans, and this is how the Greeks emerged victorious. So using this Trojan horse perception, Russians, they seem to indicate that any initiative led by the Western nations would mean that the Western nations trying to extend their influence along the Russian borders, which threatens the security of Russia. So there are limitations of a Western-led peacekeeping initiative. Strategic and diplomatic potential of the global South. Now, the global South, we know what is global South. Now, the global South can emerge as an alternative bloc offer, which means the global South, the countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, can offer non-aligned, credible alternative. Why? Because the global South so far have remained neutral. So in the Russia-Ukraine war, the countries from global South have remained neutral. They have neither taken the side of Russia or Ukraine. For example, the Western nations have sided with Ukrainians. But countries like India and countries in Africa and Latin America, they have been remained neutral. They haven't spoken against any country, neither supported any country. They have remained neutral. So, which means that countries from these bloc coming together and providing or helping with a, let's say, or leading an initiative to bring peace will add more credibility, which means given that all the nations from global South have remained neutral, there is a higher chance for these countries acting as or taking up the mediation roles between the Western nations and Russia. Moral and diplomatic opportunity. Now, given that the global South are poor countries, they have no say in the global decision making. Now, this moment, it gives an opportunity to the global South, right, to lead an initiative to establish peace, and here the global South can transform into a proactive agent. Instead of just being passive players, they can be proactive and bring stability in the region. They can add balance to the global diplomacy, the global South. Why? Because any initiative led by the global South will be acceptable to the Western nations. There's a higher chance. Why? Because they have remained neutral. They're not biased. Complement to global governance. Now, the leadership of the global South will reflect a rise of multipolarity. Multipolarity, which means the world should not be led by just one country or two countries. The world should be led by many countries. All the countries should have a say in the decision making. There should be multipolarity and not bipolarity or unipolarity. Until 1991, we saw bipolarity, the USA versus USSR. Post 1991, we are seeing unipolarity, that is, it was led by US. Now again, we are seeing USA versus China. So such uni, bi, tripolarity is harmful for global governance, for global stability. That's the reason the global south should come together, and this gives rise to multipolarity, which means there should be a wider representation in international conflict resolution. Now talking about India's role. Now in many of the peace missions, India has played a great role. For example, so far India, right, has contributed around 3 lakh soldiers. Okay, let me just check the number. Yeah. So far India has contributed 3 lakh soldiers in the United Nations peacekeeping missions, which essentially means that wherever the conflicts were occurring, so far India has contributed 3 lakh soldiers, and India is one of the largest contributors to the United Nations peacekeeping mission. Diverse so far, and at present, India has deployed 50,000 soldiers in different peacekeeping missions. Right now, given that India in the Russia-Ukraine war, India has remained neutral. So please remember that in the Russia-Ukraine war, India has remained neutral, which means that an initiative or India leading the global south. India leading the global south will add more credibility to any peace initiative that will try to establish peace between the two regions. So given India's stand, there's a higher chance that a proposal or a global south led initiative led by India can establish peace in the region. Now, in the year 1992, when there was a civil war in Yugoslavia, the United Nations Secretary General appointed an Indian diplomat to lead a UN peacekeeping mission in this country. And this reflects India's credibility, global credibility in bringing peace in the regions affected by conflict. Which means, given India has a very strong role in the different peacekeeping missions in the world backed by the United Nations, so given India's stance, India's record in the past, there's a higher chance that if India leads an initiative, there's a higher chance to establish peace in the or between the two regions. Now, what about the other countries in global south? For example, countries like Bangladesh, Rwanda, Ghana, Indonesia, even these countries have contributed immensely in the United Nations peacekeeping mission. Like we discussed, India contributed so far 5 lakh soldiers. Even these countries have contributed immensely, significantly to the United Nations peacekeeping mission. For example, Chile. Chile is a country in Latin America region. They have offered technical skills like demining and logistics. And this will only enhance the operational value of the United Nations peacekeeping missions. So, many countries in the global south can offer technical expertise which can actually establish peace in the region. China's cautious diplomacy. Now, given that China and Russians are coming close, right? Russia, or rather China, has sent a special envoy to Ukraine, which means even China wants that there should be peace between the two regions. But the way majority of the countries in the global south have remained neutral, China has indicated its willingness, or China through their actions, it suggests that China is siding with the Russians. It doesn't mean that they're against Ukraine, but given the growing proximity, it suggests that China is siding with the Russians and not remaining neutral as India is remaining. Now, need for broader participation, which means in order to establish peace, there has to be broader participation. Countries from different regions should come together and be a part of any peace initiative that has a potential to bring peace in the region. Right? So it is very important to reduce the geopolitical bias. In order to reduce the geopolitical bias, which means, for example, if the Western countries lead any initiative, it essentially means that their initiatives are likely to be biased. So, in order to remove the or reduce the geopolitical bias, it is very important for different nations from different regions to come together and be a part of the initiative, which means there has to be shared responsibility, countries coming together, taking the responsibility, working with the warring parties, and then establish peace. So, there is a need for neutral. The peace initiative should be neutral, inclusive, and credible peace. Now, avoiding perceptions of bias. Now, instead of being biased, it is important to be neutral because neutrality is essential for acceptability. So, if you're not neutral, right, which means you're siding with some, for example, China. China, we all know that, or the entire world knows that there's a growing convergence between Russians and the Chinese, which means an initiative led by the Chinese or the European parties would suggest that they are biased. That's the reason neutrality is essential for acceptability. Diversity in representation, we have discussed, which means there has to be participation from different nations. Conditions for credibility. Which are the conditions? One, operational experience like Chile has, then diplomatic neutrality like India is displaying, broader representation, the global south. So these are the conditions for credibility of any peace initiative led by the global south to establish peace. And then, of course, any peace initiative should be backed by the world body, world government, which is the United Nations, because initiative being led by the United Nations will only add more, it will add more legitimacy, more credibility to the peace initiative. Right? Yeah. So, what is the future way forward? Multilateralism over bilateralism. Instead of few countries coming together and establishing peace, it is important for multilateralism, that is multiple countries, broader representation to come together. Only then the peace will be sustainable. Else the peace won't be sustainable. In order to ensure the peace is sustainable, it is important for countries to come together, broader representation. Global South, again we discussed that it is an opportunity for the global south to ensure that they have a say in the decision making. In order for them to have a say in the decision making, they should prove their worth, they should prove their mettle, which means from policy takers, from accepting the policy to shaping the policy. This provides an opportunity to the global south, template for future intervention. If an initiative led by the global south results in success, then this will serve as a model template for any future intervention or future ceasefire. And finally, moral and strategic leadership, which means if the global south and the leadership is structured, right, this has the potential to restore global faith in non-aligned cooperative diplomacy, which means that diplomacy has to be cooperative. Countries have to come together, they have to negotiate. Instead of fighting, they have to sit on the negotiating table, discuss, work out on reducing the tension, reducing the differences, and ensure there is peace not only in the region but in the entire world. So I hope you understood the first article. Moving on to the second topic, Supreme Court directs CEC to survey forests in Agastyamalai for encroachment. So in this article, we'll discuss Central Empowered Committee and the significance of Agastyamalai. You can map this under prelims as well as under mains under the section Environment and Ecology, that is conservation, environmental pollution and degradation. Now see, is a question on the parliamentary committees. So questions on committees can be asked in the examination. That's the reason we discuss the Central Empowered Committee. So this actually is a topic which is a mix of polity as well as environment. So first we'll discuss the context. Now what is the context? The Supreme Court has directed this committee to, has requested this committee, directed this committee to undertake a survey, investigation of the Agasthyamalai Biosphere Reserve, right? Why? Because there have been concerns that the Agasthyamalai landscape is being encroached. People are actually, or people are misusing, forcefully occupying the land that falls under the Biosphere Reserve. For the commercial activities, the governments are trying to exploit the land, which means they are failing to maintain or balance the environment. That's the reason, in order to understand to what extent the biosphere has been damaged, the Supreme Court has directed this committee to undertake a survey through which, you know, things will be clear as into what extent the damage has been done. Now here, this survey will cover the entire Agasthyamalai Biosphere Reserve. Now this Agasthyamalai Biosphere Reserve will include Periyar Tiger Reserve, the Kalakad and the Mundathurai, the Meghamalai and the Thirunelveli Wildlife Sanctuaries as well. So all these sanctuaries fall under the Agasthyamalai Biosphere Reserve. This survey will generate a comprehensive data on past and present forest cover. So before the survey, what was the forest cover? Now what is, before the damage done, or before the uh, before, let's say, any development project that was started in the region, what was the forest cover, and now what is the forest cover? What was the forest cover before and what it is now? This will actually help the officials to understand the extent to which the environment has been harmed or degraded. And then the focus is on addressing the encroachments. For example, how the urbanization or the industrial activities has led to the environmental degradation. Now, what are the key concerns? Systematic encroachments, which means because of commercial purpose or commercial reasons, the extent to which the region or the land has been misused, the environment has been degraded, right? Then, and it suggests that there's an urgent need to preserve the reserved forest. Now, this case also highlights the importance of balancing forest conservation. Balancing forest conservation with the rehabilitation of displaced communities. Now, let's say, for example, whenever there is a development project planned, unfortunately, the indigenous tribes are displaced. Right now, here it is important to balance one, forest conservation, also to rehabilitate the displaced communities, which means the communities who are displaced, we have to ensure that we bring these people to the mainstream, which means we help these people have access to education, healthcare, jobs, so that they can also be a part of India's overall development. And then this directive by the Supreme Court, it reinforces, it strengthens the role of judiciary, which means judiciary has a very important role to play in the preservation of environment. First and foremost, we'll understand about the Central Empowered Committee, because questions are asked in the examination. One, this committee is set up by the Supreme Court in the year 2002 and it was restructured in the year 2008. So first and foremost, it was set up by the Supreme Court and not by the central or the state government. This committee will act as a watchdog, which means it will see the extent, or it will see what matters related to environment conservation, which means this committee will see whether the environment is being damaged or it is not. It will oversee the development projects. It will see whether the projects are harming the environment. So, the responsibility of looking after an ecologically sensitive region rests on the Central Empowered Committee. Now, as per a notification by the Environment Ministry, this Central Empowered Committee, which was an ad hoc temporary body, is now a permanent statutory institution for the environmental matters. So, when it comes to environmental matters, this body will be, or this body will be held responsible, or will overall see the environment. Now the composition of the new CEC, which means the Central Empowered Committee will have a chairman, member secretary and 3 expert members. The composition, the eligibility is mentioned here. It's self-explanatory. For example, chairman must be to be nominated by the central government, tenure 3 years, age limit should not hold a rank below the additional secretary, which means additional secretary or above should be a chairman, right? So all this composition, the conditions required, eligibility, please read by your own. You can download the DNA notes which is mentioned in the description and the comment section. So ensure that you are downloading the DNA notes so that you can revise all the points that we are discussing today. Now we'll discuss about Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve. So please remember that questions on the composition and then about the Central Empowered Committee can be asked in the examination. So make sure that you revise these points because they are very, very important. Then the significance of Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve, it is recognized as a UNESCO project. It's a UNESCO, or it has a UNESCO status, which means this UNESCO status highlights the global ecological importance of the Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve. Now it is part of the Western Ghats. Again, Western Ghat has a UNESCO status. Now, Western Ghat is recognized as one of the 8 hottest hotspots of biodiversity, not only in our country but in the world. This explains the importance of this Western Ghat and the Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve to the environment. Environmentally, this region is very, very important, very sensitive, and that's the reason it is very important for not only India but also the world to ensure that this region is protected and not encroached or degraded. Biodiversity richness, now it has a wide variety of flora and fauna including endemic and endangered species, ecological functions, it supports climate regulation, it helps to regulate the climate, which means it captures the carbon, right? Given the dense forest, it captures the carbon, it regulates the climate change, right? Water security, it acts as important watershed area, which means all the rivers and lakes surrounding this region, right? It gets water because of this Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve, and it has also cultural and tribal significance, which means this region is home to many indigenous tribes. And when it comes to tribes, they have unique customs and traditions. So, to secure the local customs and traditions, securing the Biosphere Reserve, Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve is very, very important. So, this is the significance of the Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve. So, ensure that you recall, revise the Central Empowered Committee and the Agastyamalai Biosphere Reserve, right? Now, let us focus on the third topic. The prevalence of sickle cell anemia could be higher in country. This is what the top scientists have to say. So, we'll understand about the sickle cell anemia. This is important for both prelims as well as means. Now, this is a question asked on Zika virus. So, questions on virus and diseases are asked in the examination. Now, the Council of Scientific, CSI stands for Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, right? A mission launched by CSIR, which is known by the name Sickle Cell Anemia Mission. They have recently tested around 28 lakh people across 28 states in our country. So what exactly is sickle cell? One, it is also known as the sickle cell anemia. Is a genetic disorder. So please remember, it is not caused because of any virus or bacteria. One important point for your prelims examination, it is not caused by any virus or bacteria. It is a genetic disorder. It affects the hemoglobin, which is a protein in the red blood cells. So what is the basic concept? Now, blood is made up of many constituents. For example, we have plasma, platelets, red blood cells, the white blood cells. So, the hemoglobin present in the red blood cells, what it does is, it takes, so we inhale, we are inhaling the oxygen. So, the hemoglobin, it is taking the oxygen and ensuring that each and every cell of our body gets the oxygen. So, hemoglobin in the red blood cells is responsible to carry oxygen to different parts of our body. Alright. Now, normally the red blood cells, they are disc shaped and flexible. They are disc shaped and flexible, which means they can move easily and can also this helps in the smooth passage of blood. But in the sickle cell disease, a person suffering from the disease, the red blood cells, which are usually disc shaped, in this disease it is crescent or sickle shaped. They are not flexible. The red blood cells, which are crescent shaped, sickle shaped, are not flexible. It does not carry the oxygen as freely as it used to carry when a person is not suffering from any disease. For example, let me show you here. See, this is a red blood cell. It's disc shaped. It's flexible. It carries the oxygen easily. Now here see, sickle cell. It is actually blocking the blood flow. It is causing the or it is restricting the flow of the blood. This is the difference between a person who is normal and a person suffering from sickle cell disease. Now, these are the symptoms you can read by your own. This is self-explanatory. I hope you understood this concept. It's a genetic disorder not caused by bacteria and virus. Normally, the red blood cells are disc shaped. It is flexible. A person suffering from the disease, the red blood cells are crescent shaped and not flexible. And so, if two people who marry each other have, let's say, the sickle cell disease, then there's a higher chance for the offspring to also suffer from the sickle cell disease. And what is the solution? Bone marrow transplant and gene therapy. So what is bone marrow transplant? Now bone marrow is a soft tissue inside the bone. Bone marrow is a soft tissue inside the bone. So under the bone marrow transplant, the faulty bone marrow is replaced by a healthy bone marrow. Faulty bone marrow is replaced by a healthy bone marrow. Simple. This is the solution, right? And then the gene therapy, the faulty gene in a person's cell is replaced by a or it is repaired, and this is how the gene which is responsible is repaired, and this is how a person can be treated. Now talking about the presence of the disease in our country, India has the second highest disease burden globally after the African countries. An estimated 30 to 40,000 children are born with the disease every year. 1 in 86 births among the scheduled tribe population is affected by this disease. So these are some numbers that you need to remember. And then these are the government initiative. For example, the National Sickle Cell Anemia Elimination Mission was launched in the year 2023. Again, this is self-explanatory, so I please request you to read these points. I hope you understood the sickle cell disease, right? Now, the last topic, the title of the topic is Telangana to move Supreme Court against Andhra Pradesh river interlinking bid. So here in this topic we'll understand about the interstate river water dispute. This you can map under GS paper 2 under the polity section. A question on interstate water dispute was asked in the examination. That's the reason understanding this topic is very, very important. Okay, now what is the context? The Andhra Pradesh government, they are working on two interlinking of rivers. They are working on linking rivers in the state of Andhra Pradesh. And which are the names of the projects? The Godavari Banakachela Link Scheme and the Rayalaseema Lift Irrigation Scheme. So these are the two projects the Andhra Pradesh government is working on, against which the Telangana government has raised an objection in the Supreme Court. Right? Now, so as we discussed, these are the two projects. Now, Telangana says that the Andhra Pradesh, the way Andhra Pradesh is trying to interlink the rivers, it is violative of the Godavari Water Dispute Tribunal Award of 1981, the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act of 2014. This act actually led to the bifurcation of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Before 14, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana were one state. In 14, it was bifurcated, led to two different states. Right? So, Telangana says that Andhra Pradesh cannot continue with these two projects because this is actually violating this award and also this act. Right? Now, in order to understand what exactly it is, let us try to understand the basic concept. Now, Article 131 says that whenever there is a dispute between center and the state, or a state or two different states, conflict between center and the states, or one state versus other state, the Supreme Court has the jurisdiction to look after the dispute or issue between center and the states, or between one state and other state. Article 131, including water sharing conflicts. So when there is a water conflict between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, only Supreme Court can hear the dispute, the High Court cannot hear the dispute. Second, Article 262. Now whenever there is a dispute, right, the Parliament has the power to make a law, thereby to establish a body to resolve the dispute. So Parliament will make a body, this body will be responsible to resolve the tension or dispute between two states. Seventh schedule. See, water is a state subject, which means ideally the state government should be making laws. But regulation, if now river is not something that is only restricted to one state, it flows from one state to other state. The regulation of the river flow, when it comes to regulation of the river flow from one state to other, the central government will look after it. So the regulation of interstate water will be looked by the central government. And Article 256 and 257, it ensures that the state governments are complying with the laws made by the union. A law which the central government makes, the state governments cannot refuse to adhere or obey by the laws made by the union, because if this happens, so then precedence rule can be imposed in that state. Now, so if there's a dispute with respect to the rivers passing from one state to other state, like Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, for that, Parliament under Article 262 has enacted Interstate River Water Dispute Act of 1956. 1956. Why? To resolve the dispute between one state and the other state, or let's say two or more states on one side and other few states on the other side. Article 262, what is the purpose? To resolve the disputes, right? What is the tribunal mechanism? So if the state government believes that a water dispute has arisen between that state and other state, then it can request the central government to resolve the dispute. And if the union government is satisfied that yes, there is a dispute, then the union government will constitute a tribunal. Is nothing but a court. Is nothing but a court. Now the decision given by this tribunal is binding. Decision of the tribunal cannot be challenged in any court, be it High Court or Supreme Court. The decision given by the tribunal is final. Please remember this for your prelims examination. No judicial review, right? Then we'll discuss the River Boats Act of 1956. The purpose of Interstate Water Dispute Act is to resolve the dispute. This River Board of 1956, it allows the union government in consultation with the state governments to form the river boards. Now these river boards are different from these river boards are responsible for integrated development and regulation of the river basins, which means these bodies will be responsible to ensure that the developmental projects happening on any river should be in consonance with the environmental laws. Features: these river boards are meant to be technical and planning bodies. They are not the ones like the tribunal board. No, they are the ones who actually helps in planning. They are technical bodies. It's a board comprising of the experts. They guide the states on irrigation. For example, the river water is used for irrigation, then also to generate electricity, the hydroelectricity, navigation. So the river boards actually help the states. And please remember, so far no river board has been constituted. These are the points of the River Board Act of 1956, the Interstate Water Dispute Act of 1956, and the Interstate Tribunal. I hope you understood each and every point, which again is very important for your prelims examination. And this ends the discussion of the 4 topics of the day. Let us start with the practice question. In the context of the ongoing Ukraine conflict, examine the case for a peace initiative led by the Global South. How can such an initiative enhance the credibility and inclusiveness of the global peacekeeping effort? So, in the introduction, mention the issue between Russia and the Western powers, mention what is Global South and how the Global South can lead to a more sustainable solution. Then in the body, highlight the limitations of Western backed peace initiative as we discussed, then explain the potential of Global South, how the Global South can lead or can lead the peace initiative and establish peace, highlight the importance of India and countries like other nations like Ghana, Bangladesh, Indonesia, who have contributed significantly to the United Nations peacekeeping mission. Also, you can mention the 1992 example of Yugoslavia civil war, where an Indian diplomat was appointed to lead a peacekeeping initiative, right? And then finally, you can mention the way forward. You can mention that it is very important that neutrality is very important for establishing peace, right? So there has to be a broader representation. Any peace initiative should be led by the United Nations. It should have a broader representation, right? And it should ensure that the countries who are part of the peace initiative are not biased. They are neutral, like India, so as to ensure that there is sustainable peace. This is how you frame the answer. Now, these are the questions based on the topics that were discussed yesterday. with reference to Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. First, it is a centrally sponsored scheme that covers school education from pre-primary to senior secondary level, that is until the 12th standard. Yes, this statement is correct. It subsumes the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan and the teacher education scheme. Yes, this one is also correct. Implementation of national education policy including the 3 language formula is mandatory. No, it's not mandatory. This one is incorrect, right? So again, it is left on the states. If the states have to, or if the states are willing to accept it, they can, or it is not mandatory. So this one is incorrect, which means option A is the correct answer for this particular question. The next question with reference to undersea internet cables, consider the following statements. Over 90% of the world's internet traffic is carried through undersea cables. Yes, and the rest traffic is taken care by the satellites, right? India has the highest number of international undersea cable. This absolutely incorrect, because um, India has a minimum number of undersea cables. So India is not leading with respect to having the maximum number of undersea cables. So countries like Singapore, Japan, South Korea are actually leading the table. And then a damage to undersea cables can severely disrupt internet access, financial transaction and communication services. This one is also correct, which means 1 and 3 option B is the correct answer for this particular question. The next question with reference to International Criminal Court, consider the following statements. The ICC can prosecute individuals for crimes such as genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Yes, this one is correct. All United Nations member states are automatically parties to the Rome Statute. This is incorrect, which means in order to be a part of Rome's ICC, the countries have to sign Rome Statute. So India is a member of United Nations but not a member of ICC. India is a signatory. Wrong. India has not signed, neither ratified. It is a member of United Nations. But in order to be a part of ICC, you need to sign a separate Rome Statute. So this one is also incorrect, which means option A is the correct answer. Next question with reference to emerging satellite internet constellations, consider the following statements. Satellite constellations for broadband like the Starlink, right, or the Amazon's, there's some company, are typically deployed in low Earth orbit. Yes, this low Earth orbit, the range is 500 to 2000 kilometers. So this one is correct. India is a part of the Starlink satellite internet project through a government-led. No, government is not a part of this. This Starlink satellite internet project, they are having talks with Jio and Airtel. It's not a government-led initiative. So this one is incorrect. Satellite internet systems have the potential to bypass terrestrial infrastructure and offer global internet. Yes. So 1 and 3, option B is the correct answer. And then these are the DNA questions based on today's topics. And this brings us to the end of today's DNA discussion. I hope students you had a lot to learn from today's DNA discussion. Again, I request you to please comment in the comment section in case you come across any difficulty, any problem, right? Make sure you download the DNA notes so that you revise all the points that we discussed in today's DNA, and make sure you work hard. Ensure that you listen to the DNA daily, never miss any DNA, so that it will help you to have a good command over the current affairs, right? So that's it. On this note, I'll call it a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck, and please ensure to hit the like, subscribe and share option. Thank you so much.